Hello and welcome to Freebird Media. I'm Alex Van Hamme. Thanks for joining me today. Today I'm very excited to speak to K.M. Breakey, an author from the West Coast. Mr. Breakey, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Alex.
So you've written a couple of 4 books here, I see, and the last 2 seem pretty controversial to me. So I'm kind of interested to talk to you about them. So your most recent book is called Never, Never, and Never Again, and it's about I guess you could say racial tensions in South Africa.
Sure, yeah. Never, Never, and Never Again came out in January, and it's a pretty ambitious. It was and is a pretty ambitious endeavor, really. It covers a little over 4 decades in South Africa. Tracks a family, an Afrikaner family with some English offshoots, English heritage offshoots. And just kind of delves into the whole challenge down there, where it started, how it evolved, the 1980s like apartheid still clinging, hanging on, and then into the Mandela years, and then into the chaos that we see consuming the country today. It brings you right up into the present, and I'll tell you, Alex, like literally there is a scene written and up to the minute of right before publication. And little did I know, published January 5th, so much would happen in the last 3 months, and so much bad stuff. So, I mean, it's you can't keep up with how fast the country is unraveling, unfortunately.
Right.
But, there is hope. And, I mean, one of the reasons I wrote the book is to shed light. Many people are trying to shed light on the challenges in South Africa now, and there are signs. Like, for example, Ernst Roots was on Tucker Carlson just last night. I'm not sure if you caught that. He's been pushing the message about farm murders for many years. And anyway, so it's starting to get a little bit, but boy oh boy, it's bad news.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you about this because a lot of the content I do is usually specifically Canadian, but I wanted to talk to somebody that can talk about South Africa, because you hear the term white genocide being used a lot in the context of South Africa, and there's also people here in Canada like Professor Ricardo Duchesne who are using the term white ethnocide to apply to Canada, and that's sort of a different concept. So I wanted to clarify what people mean when they talk about white genocide in the South African sense, and understand more about what's going on there, because there's a lot of propaganda and a lot of sensationalism and stuff. But a lot of people want to also dismiss it, completely, and so I want to actually talk about what you know. And you're also Canadian yourself, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Born in Toronto, grew up in Vancouver, still live here, right here in Vancouver. Beautiful city, beautiful, safe, peaceful. Very, very multicultural city. We can talk about a little bit about that as the conversation continues. Just like Cape Town, for example, beautiful, beautiful, not safe, also multicultural. What is the difference? It's there are big differences. But those are tough terms. Yeah. Ethnocide, genocide, white genocide. People usually take 2 steps back and say, "Oh, I can't be associated with that." And myself to a certain degree included. What I want to do, I see a problem. I want to write about it. I want to put it in a fictional context, and I do see a problem in South Africa specifically. Since Mandela's time, he took the presidency in 1994. That's 24 years ago. Depending on the numbers you believe, 70,000, 80,000, 100,000 plus whites have been slaughtered. In that time, probably 250,000 blacks have also been killed. I mean, these are big numbers, and that's one of the standard defenses. Oh, it happens to everybody. Well, the problem is it happens specifically to whites. Whites are targeted. And there is a lot of propaganda. It's very difficult to know what to believe. One of the things I did was I must confess, I've never been to South Africa. Well, I've always wanted to go. I've read extensively about it. These days, I would be scared to go. But I do have a lot of friends, a lot of contacts in South Africa. And when I was researching the book, I spoke extensively with these people, and I still do. And I mean, the fear is just, it's palpable. I mean, they're basically, their government is their enemy. The government is the enemy of the white man. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the news reports about how land expropriation without compensation legislated now, and I mean, even if the authorities are not going in with tanks and machine guns or whatever, I mean, what you have when you have that language out there, what it does is it unleashes the mobs. Mm-hmm. It unleashes the mobs, and the mobs are wild and crazy. They're destroying towns. They're destroying properties. And another thing I hear a lot is that you always hear plasmord, farm murders. It is no picnic to be a city dweller in South Africa either. Just to be clear, everything you do, running around in your brain, you're picking up your kids, you're doing this, you're doing that. Personal safety is always, it is the number one priority. When you're in your home, everything is locked, bars are up, alarms are on. Everything you do is about preserving your safety. It's still not enough.
Right.
Still not enough, but it's, I mean, that's how they live their lives, and it's getting worse.
Well, I'm interested. What brought all of this to your attention? Because you've written 4 books now, but your background for a long time was in mathematics and IT, right?
Well, I've always been a reader, and I'm a software guy. I love math. I'm a math major from Simon Fraser University, right here in Vancouver, Burnaby, actually, and I got into science fiction. And as a youth, and loved it, and then I started getting into other authors. Loved Wilbur Smith. He's written extensively about South Africa. I even mentioned him in the author notes in the book. But I love page turners, and I mean, I remember reading Grisham specifically in the early '90s and saying, you know what, he makes it look so easy. That I said, I think I can do that. And he does make it look easy to write those page turners that are very centric around the legal profession. So, I mean, my first book, I kind of took a page out of his approach, and it is centered around the software development profession, and it centers on an idea that I had, and which is a crazy idea, but it's fiction. You can write anything you want. And that's so. I mean, I had no social issues in mind when I started becoming a writer. Wrote the book in 2008, put it out in 2010, and then in parallel with that, Alex, always been interested in politics. In my first book, The World Clicks, there are political references, specifically because the book takes place in 2008. There are political references to Obama's inauguration. And if you go back and read that book, you'll find that my position on Obama was like a lot of people. It was absolute extreme optimism. This is it. We have cured racism in America. It is done. We have a black president. I saw Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson, tears rolling down their eyes. Finally, they can put it to rest. And unfortunately, as I watched the presidency unfold over 8 years, exactly the opposite happened. It was inflamed. It was at every turn. Right. President Obama seemed. I don't know if he was doing it on purpose, but the reality is he was doing it. And for me, the breaking point was Ferguson. I think I saw an interview where you talked about historically being a liberal.
Yeah.
Everyone starts as a liberal. Yeah. Everyone starts looking at the world with rose-colored glasses. I mean, that's the only way to look at the world. But unfortunately, we have this thing called reality. And if you choose to ignore reality, then you've got to live in a life of fiction. I write fiction, but lately my fiction has become reality-based fiction. And it's fiction. How do I put it? I basically want liberals especially to read my books, and I want to red pill them. I want to red pill those liberals that haven't completely dissociated from real life, from reality, and many have, as I'm sure you know. Many You cannot penetrate their bubble of idealism and fiction, and they're done.
Absolutely.
Trump derangement syndrome, for example. You can't get through to these people.
I feel that I have demonstrated over the last 2 years via live streams and my videos and going to events. I've shown that there's a generation now of people raised on an ideology and they have a religious fervor to it. And they're beyond rationalizing, especially because it appeals to a segment of the population that are already biologically oriented to think that way. So when you attach this ideology to them, they're literally sort of beyond reasoning with.
I didn't know how bad it was, and like obviously because I was seeing it before the era of Trump, and then once Trump came on the scene, and yes, he is vulgar at times. Yes, he's a straight shooter. But boy, oh boy, he is not afraid to say the truth. And that was so refreshing to a guy like me when his announcement where he said, Mexico is not sending us their best. They're sending rapists. And everyone they didn't dispute so much what he said, the fact that he said it. You cannot say that. Well, he said it. And he said a lot of other things. And for me, it was just refreshing. Let's debate what he said. Let's talk about that. He opened the can of worms. Yes, open porous borders don't work. It's proven.
Yeah.
And, we have our own issues north of the border, as you well know, with our own government. And they're turning a blind eye. And Trudeau, everybody's welcome. Come on in. It's not a policy. It's a tweet or it's a message. And again, just like South Africa, how the messages from the top unleash the mobs, the messages from the top of Canada unleash the people into our country, and it's not going well at the borders.
Well, I don't know if you saw, but I did a live stream from the border at Roxham Road at the Quebec crossing. I went there with Faith, and we showed like a whole lot. I live streamed the entire process of buses arriving, people getting off, what the RCMP says to them, when they cross, when they're arrested, walking away, the entire thing, and it's all day long. So there's definitely a problem there. But you mentioned
I saw it. I saw it, and I say you guys are brave. I commend you. I sit in my house and I write books and I tell it like it is. But I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to get beat up. I don't want any of that. I do want to tell the truth. And as long as I can write books and tell the truth, I'll do it. But I realize too, we need people like yourself, like Faith, to go out and confront the nonsense face to face. It's not easy. It's again very, very courageous of you guys to do that.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. I think at this point the cat's out of the bag with me now, so I'm got skin in the game. So I'm becoming less nervous about stuff because I'm in this now. But I appreciate the support. I'm curious to talk to you as well because you're a fiction writer and Free Bird Media is all about free speech and stuff. And you mentioned Charlottesville there, so I was wondering what your take is on as a fiction writer, how do you feel about free speech, in regard to Faith Goldie being removed from the Jordan Peterson event because of the Charlottesville episode?
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about? And do you think she should have been allowed to speak at that event?
Yeah, I don't know the exact specifics. I'm definitely aware of Faith Goldie. Definitely have a lot of admiration for Faith Goldie. One thing that I've noticed she does is she does not remotely control her language in terms of how it's going to inflame the left. Mm-hmm. So as I speak to you, I will. There's landmines everywhere. They're there. Like I could step on them and blow up my life tomorrow or today. So I'm very cautious. Does that mean I have something to hide? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It just means that the thought police have set traps for me that they can unleash the mob on me and smear me and ruin. And I don't want that. I just want to tell the truth. I want to live a peaceful life. I want safe streets. And boy, I'd like to write some good books that are page turners, interesting characters, and have a special message of truth that resonates with people. Some of the people that read. So I will talk more about your Faith Goldie question in a moment. But I do find that a lot of the liberals that do read my book, with some notable exceptions, definitely some notable exceptions, but most of them have, because I'm talking about real people in real situations, and then really horrible things are entering their lives through these forces that the left and leftism is unleashing, and they see it unfold, and it's like, what could you have done differently besides you've got white skin. You can't change that. You're walking through life and having white skin, and bad things are happening to you for that very reason. You mentioned Charlottesville. My third book, my second book with a very intense social message is Johnny and Jamal. So Never, Never, Never Again is South Africa. Johnny and Jamal is race relations in the U.S. And I got interested in that. My red pill moment was Ferguson, 2014. Obama still had 2 years left. Well, you know the story, and you know the fiction, the hands up, don't shoot. Mm-hmm. Pure fiction. Mm-hmm. Absolute fiction. We had, by all accounts, a thug, a strong arm robbery, absolutely no respect for authority, and unfortunately, it cost Michael Brown his life. That type of behavior. It's very unfortunate, but Obama poured fuel on it. He actually said, in one of his, I believe it was from Ferguson. No, it was actually Charlottesville, when he said, Charleston, with the horrible shooting at the church. But Obama said, he introduced politics, and he said, we'll call back Johnny, but we won't call back Jamal for a job interview. It's like, well, you're at a funeral, and the race is toxic, and you're introducing this little silliness. And It's just one thing after the other with Obama, with always being that negative presence. And the more you read, and the more you see, and there is a lot of propaganda, so it's hard to know what to believe these days. Obama is either just a complete moron who didn't know what to do and did everything wrong, or he's actually an evil person that hated America and sought to destroy America. I mean, it's one or the other, isn't it? He was very eloquent. I give him that much. He was charming and humorous at times. God love him. But, boy, as far as presidents go, atrocious. I mean, you can't get worse unless you look north of the border and look at our prime minister, and then you probably find someone that's worse.
I do agree with you on that personally. I think Trudeau is absolutely horrible, and as a former leftist, I was very optimistic like yourself with Obama in the beginning, and now I think he's probably the worst president in United States history. Like yourself, I'm someone who until 2 years ago started to get red pilled. I was very on the left, so I didn't know a lot. But one of the biggest red pills I've had in the last 2 years, especially in the last year, was a lot of work by Dinesh D'Souza. Are you familiar with him? He started to outline the history of the Democratic Party in the U.S. And when I started to be exposed to this information and hear like the way he laid things out about the history of the Democrats and how they've always sort of been the true racists, that was eye-opening for me. And now I see the Democratic Party in a whole new light. So, and Obama himself has a lot of connections to shady people and a lot of people with a lot of anti-American sentiments.
Louis Farrakhan come to mind?
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of there's a white older guy from the 70s that was involved in some sort of domestic terrorism that he was a pupil of. I'm trying to remember the guy's name. It's not coming to me.
That Obama was a pupil of.
Yeah. I've seen him debate Dinesh D'Souza on YouTube.
And what the point being what?
That he's just a leftist, basically, with a very sort of cultural Marxist attitude. So very like an ideology that is sort of based on disliking America, which is the last trait you're going to want in the leader of
America
your
as
country.
we know and love it, and just as Trudeau dislikes Canada as we know and love it, with its strong European roots, everything, it's Parliament, it's everyone's equal, and he just seems steadfast in his let's tear it all down. I mean, I look at the changing the national anthem. It's a small thing. Well, it's not a small thing. The underlying message is you guys suck. You guys suck, and this is another example of how you suck and how you've been sucking and pushing bad messages, and we're going to start changing that. How long before, and I'm not the first one to say this, but how long before our national anthem, the God references are gone too? You know?
Exactly.
I don't think they have, we'll probably get a new national anthem before Trudeau is done, which hopefully is at the next election. I mean, I could not imagine more time with this clown running our country.
The only politician I think is worse than him is our Liberal Premier here in Ontario, Kathleen Wynne. So we're all hoping we're really hoping that we can fix that in June. Fingers crossed, I guess.
Well, make sure you vote.
Yeah, exactly right. Getting back to your books, though, so I'm curious: have you had any kind of very negative, aggressive feedback since publishing this?
Yeah, I've had a few people come at me. I've had a few negative reviews, and that's fine. That's fine. I mean, I had one recently that they really liked Johnny and Jamal. They really liked it. And when I say they, it was a two-person review team. And for whatever reason, they didn't like this latest one. And, you know, the black-white issue, and they're both black-white issues. And by the way, that is not my issue that I run my life around. Those were two issues, topics that interested me: black, white in America, and the South Africa situation. But and my next book, by the way, you'll be happy to know this, focused on Canada, focused on what's going on in our country, and you know, if it doesn't change, where are we going with this? Well, I don't think anyone's going to like that answer, but I aim to answer it in the book. That's going to be less about race and more about culture.
How far along in that are you?
Oh, that's come in March of 2019.
Oh, all right. So
March of 2019, and again, like I said, I like to red pill liberals. And when I say liberals, I don't necessarily mean people that support the Liberal Party in Canada. I just mean liberals, leftists in general. And I'm getting it out before our next federal election. And with luck, with hope, and with support from individuals like yourself, I can get that into the hands of enough people, and hopefully red pill a few people and steal a few votes. Not steal, win a few votes for the correct side, which is anyone but Justin Trudeau, I'm afraid to say.
Excellent.
And I am afraid to say it, given the climate of free speech north of the border, by the way.
It's
very
alarming.
Say certain things.
We definitely have some problems. I'm curious. So, given that that's the theme of your next book, set in Canada, are you yourself familiar with the work of Ricardo Duchesne?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I've seen many interviews. You know, I've read parts of his book. It's amazing. It's amazing, and it's scary, and it's powerful. And I mean, you read it, you won't be the same person.
Definitely, I think I agree with you on that. It changes your perspective. That's when it comes to Canada. That's the one nonfiction book I like to recommend the most consistently, because I think he does a really good job of laying out facts and history and just explaining where we're going, spiraling out of control. You know, so. But I'm really glad you're the first fiction writer I've heard of that's tackling this issue, and I'm just glad to hear that it's even getting attention in that form. You know, because. You're the only fiction writer I know of that writes about this.
You know, as far as I know, I haven't found anyone else doing what I'm doing, and I like that. I like to be in that position. And you know, for example, I have seen a lot of social justice warrior type fiction. It's invading the YA space, which young adult space. And I'm going to name the book. There's a book called "The Hate You Give," the hate, and then the letter U. Give. The acronym is THUG. That's not a coincidence. And essentially, it's what I talked about with Black Americans and Black America and the interaction with cops, and you know, the whole unhealthy dynamic. I mean, is it the cops' fault, or is there a problem with the community? And how it's descended into hellholes in Baltimore, Chicago, St. Louis, which is where I partly set my third book. where was I going with that? Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, because what you're based on something you're saying earlier. Do you consider your work? These are serious issues, but do you think there's the overall tone is optimistic?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let me. Before I finish that, or before I address that book, The Hate You Give, I became interested in it because it was plying the fiction. It was plying the fairy tale in a fictional form. So I thought that's kind of interesting. It's exactly what I'm doing, but it's pushing the false narrative. And I envy their sales, envy the sales of that book. But I actually looked up the author. I looked up the author on Twitter, and I'm not even that active on Twitter. I haven't been lately. I was blocked. I didn't know this person, so I was blocked by her. So somehow or other, she found out about my book, and I was blocked. So I thought that was fairly interesting.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, is the tone optimistic? The answer is yes, but it's cautionary too. It's like there is a thread of optimism. It's kind of like how I feel in real life. Is Canada? Should we throw in the towel and run for the hills and protect our immediate descendants? But God knows what will happen to our descendants 2, 3, 4 generations down the line. Exactly what's happening in South Africa in the 1970s and 80s when people worried a little bit about what was going on, worried about their descendants, and boy, now their descendants are being slaughtered. So I don't want that to happen in Canada. I don't want us to live in fear, as some of us already do, because I'm worried I'm going to say the wrong thing and offend the wrong mob. I just want the truth, and I want safe streets. And you know as well as I do, we've kind of unleashed the multiculturalism, multiracial society. So that's not probably going to change anytime soon in Canada. And I have friends of all races, and I love these people of all races. They're my friends. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to call out behavior in certain groups. Islam, Black Lives Matter. I'm not going to fear calling them out because I'm going to offend my Muslim friend or my black friend. I have to. We all have to. And it's scary because that's just not done in Canada. It's certainly not done by a white, straight male. That's just all. The only thing a white, straight male should do in our society, Alex, is submit to everything and shut up and live as quietly as possible. That's what we're supposed to do. I'm not doing that.
Yeah, I know. It's
like that.
I actually think it's kind of hilarious because that's exactly what they're expecting, and I'm like, do you know anything about this group of people? Like, that's the category least likely to submit. Well, I don't. There's a lot of soy boys in Toronto, and that's a colloquialism
because of the
I use.
Indoctrination too. I mean, indoctrination is so powerful, and it starts in the schools.
I don't know. I personally think that my not immunity, because I think with time, anyone that has a certain level of intelligence with time will outgrow leftist narratives just because they're simply not real. But I think that there's a social psychologist, Jonathan Haidt,
Yeah.
And he's got lectures on YouTube, and he talks a lot about libertarian psychology. And I think when I analyze myself, I kind of fall into that category. So I think I'm sort of programmed to be. I don't like being told what to say, And I thought there'd be more people like us, I guess, in our category that would stand up to a lot of this left-wing stuff. Because now that I'm talking out loud, I realize, there's a lot of submission in Toronto. I don't know where this attitude comes from, really.
Well, it's fear, I think, Alex. Like I'm sure you know. Who's the actor? James Woods. James Woods, very active on Twitter, very hilarious.
Yeah.
Spot on in so many cases. When he said he goes to Hollywood parties, and there's so many people whispering to him, you know what, I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yeah,
I can't say it, I'll kill my career. I'm with you. So it's the same in every walk of life because, I'm older than you. I think you're like early 30s. I'm early 50s. I've made some money. I don't want to lose my income. But there's, I've got a certain baseline where I'm kind of feeling like I'm okay. And I don't want to really gamble my ability to earn a professional income because I don't sell enough books to do that right now. But I also, I feel such a need to spread the message and spread the truth. And, if I can do it through fiction, then so be it, I'll do it. but yeah, it's like not everyone can do it. Not everyone can do it. You're doing it.
It's true.
What price are you paying? You're paying a price. I'm sure you are. Right?
Yeah, I'm blacklisted for sure from everything. But funny side note to this, I'd never talked about this yet before, but I was even before I started Freebird Media, I was blacklisted from the stuff anyway because I have I've been solicited by companies like Vice Media, for example, and for like just I guess legal reasons. I won't go into details, but let's just say I have no respect for companies like that, and I've been solicited by them before, and it didn't work out. And so, I've been blacklisted from pretty much every mainstream outlet at this point you could think of. So I just can, but that's liberating because now I can say the truth. Because you know what? Like, for example, Freebird Media right now, it's basically just me and a couple of my colleagues who are also men, right? So it's completely a male outlet kind of. And the thing is, like, as a media company, if I had a female, like say an attractive female that was willing to just talk about the same issues as me on camera, my company would be 10 times bigger. And there's a lot of women and some really pretty ones that say like, Alex, we really respect what you're doing, we agree with you, and they've toyed with the idea of like joining Freebird Media, but at the end of the day, they're like, it's just too much of a social risk, to be associated with you. So, and I understand that, and I respect, I respect that. So, at the end of the day, I think
Alex, I'll just jump in. I think there might be some middle ground where you can spread messages of truth. But you have to be careful because of all the landmines that are out there, and the people that are wholly committed to social change and social change now. All I'm trying to do is put the brakes on the lunacy. I mean, I have certain things I'd maybe like to happen, but I don't see them happening tomorrow or even the next day. But I am going to point out the fact that this change is happening at 1,000 miles an hour, and it's going to overwhelm all of us like a tidal wave if we don't put the brakes on it. A lot of people think that Trump is doing a lot of good in the Western world, but they also ultimately think that it's just a period where the nonsense is slowing. He's slowing it down. He's not stopping anything. The forces of the Democratic Party, they don't have any message to speak of, as you know, but do they have a chance at winning the next election? Sure they do. Mm-hmm. Why? Because there's a porous border, there's no morals. They'll lie, cheat, steal, they'll do whatever they have to do. So is it just a matter of time? I don't know. But, so again, just to hit my point, with you bringing in someone, I think you can do it in such a way that you're kind of just saying, wait a second, look at that. That's a problem. You don't necessarily have to go all radical. Just say there's a problem there. And I don't want to not talk about it for fear. So I have to talk about it. And just carefully.
That is exactly my plan. I don't respect much of the conservative media in Ontario because I think it's almost all tabloid-esque sensationalism, which doesn't really help our cause. And I also don't like the fact that they talk about the same issues I talk about, so I get lumped in with all these sensationalists because, it's better. I just want to actually tell the truth at the end of the day, right? That's why, I'm not militant about my narratives, So I want.
You bill yourself as a journalist, and what does a journalist do? Reports on things that are happening, and you would be, you have to be authentic to what you see, don't you? Isn't that like the number one rule of journalism?
Well, that's been so obscured over the years, but I would say so. Yes, so yeah, that is my personal style, for sure. But so getting back to your books, so you've covered the U.S., South Africa, and now you're going to deal with Canada in your fiction writing. So
it is bigger than Canada. It's mostly set in Canada, but it will be bigger than Canada. But yeah, definitely. So, if you're Canadian, you're going to get a good dose in this next one.
Is it set in the West Coast, or where's it set?
You take a guess.
In Quebec?
No.
West Coast.
No. Oh. It's set in the West Coast. Okay, yeah. All my books have some footprint in Vancouver, and the whole write what you know motto. I pretty much take that to heart. And I used to kind of worry about that, but when you look at one of the greatest writers, albeit a liberal nut job, Stephen King. I love Stephen King.
Me too. I love him, but recently his Twitter feed for the last since Trump I'm so bummed out.
It scares me, and let's follow that up. But the point about Stephen King, obviously, the guy writes amazing books, and not all of them, but a huge percentage are set in Maine, for crying out loud. So I figure if he can set his books in Maine, which is, off the beaten track, and then some, I can set a lot of my books in Vancouver, and no one's going to worry too much about that.
Sure.
But yeah, it worries me when I see someone so smart, so insightful to the human condition, which he is. If you've read his books, you'd know that.
Mm-hmm.
Just amazing insight, yet just in with the leftist crowd and the nonsense. And
yes, that's very confusing to me.
It is confusing to me, and it occasionally makes me doubt my own position. And not for long, mind you. Not for long. One thing I'll say about people like Stephen King, another one is Jim Carrey, brilliant comic actor and the ultimate leftist these days. They're very, very far from the tip of the spear. Okay, so the liberal nonsense policies that they push aggressively and ridicule anyone who doesn't, they don't feel anything personally.
Right, yeah.
They don't feel, when the migrants show up in numbers and destroy a neighborhood because they have no ability to assimilate into the Western culture, and they consume the resources, the welfare systems, they're not going to feel that. They're not going to see it in their neighborhoods. And when they do, they'll find a new neighborhood. And one day the neighborhoods will run out, I guess. I mean, that's what's happening in South Africa. There's no safe havens left in South Africa for even the richest folks.
I have
lots left in Canada.
I have very specific memories of growing up and being about, I would say, approximately 9 years old, because I was born in 1986. So, but I remember the whole Mandela and ending of apartheid stuff, and how, I come from a liberal household, so there's a lot of sort of celebration around all of that, and so I specifically remember glorifying all of this. And Nelson Mandela, my whole life, was always portrayed as being sort of a civil rights hero or like a heroic figure, and but now here we are, and this sort of validates, in my opinion, everything I've been trying to warn people about. Here we are, with the land reappropriation, and they said this wasn't going to happen 20 years ago, and now here we are, it's happening, right? Because they're taking the land back, they're not compensating the whites for it. Do you know off the top of your head any of the murder statistics going on in Africa right now?
Well, I mentioned that some 100,000 have been killed since 1994. That's a number that you see. You see various. It's all right around there. The South African government obscures race-based statistics on crime. They started that in, I believe, 2007. There are some estimates. I don't have any of that at my fingertips. What I like to think of is the mood in the street. And the mood in the street for any white person walking around in a city or a farm in South Africa is fear. Unless you're cocooned in your bubble behind the electric fences and the gates, and the security system, lit up, even then, you're not really. One guy said, a young guy that I happen to know, he said, you know what, we're all light sleepers here. No one really. You ever wake up in the middle of the night, Alex? You hear a noise and you go, "Geez, what was that?" Of course you have. They do that, and they literally fear for their lives. So it's a horrible, horrible way to live.
Do they have gun rights there the way they have in the United States? Are all the whites armed with guns, or can they not get their hands on them?
The gun rights, the gun laws, as I understand it, they're very strict. And there's a lot of hoops to jump through if you want to obtain a firearm in South Africa, and you've got to deal with the state, and the state is run by inept civil servants and layers upon layers of paid government workers that shouldn't be there. And so basically, you want anything, you want a passport, you want anything, a driver's license. You're dealing with ineptitude. So it's the same with gun laws. I happen to know someone who has no criminal record. He's a South African, and he went through the process, and he'll never get a gun. He'll never get, and he needs it. He needs it to defend his family. We're Canadian, and I won't speak for you, Alex, but my view as a Canadian, we didn't have the Second Amendment. I've kind of often wondered why it's such a precious right to Americans. And I've come to understand but we just haven't been bred in that type of culture.
Sure.
And I never saw a gun. Like I fired a gun, I think, when I was like 8 years old. I went to my friend's cabin and they had some target practice. Other than that, I've never even held a gun. But I've also lived behind a wall of such safety and security in peaceful Vancouver, still peaceful, and I hope it stays that way, that I haven't needed one. I mean, the crime that we have is drug-driven and for the most part petty. There are some issues flaring up from time to time. Some of it even race-based, but it's not a big problem in Vancouver. I can't speak for Toronto and then where you are.
Well, it's hard for me to judge Toronto without statistics, although it's getting worse in Toronto. But my father's side of the family, for example, my father's an American, and he grew up in Detroit City. And then he came, my father's side came to Southern Ontario from Detroit as part of the White Flight in the 70s. And so I've always been very, and I grew up in a neighborhood where we didn't lock our doors at night. And there's almost zero violent crime and certainly no murders. And so I've always been very conscious of the fact that I live in essentially a paradise with no crime, and yet very close geographically, just across the border, like a 2-hour drive, is a completely different universe with extreme crime, racial differences, gun violence.
It's a mini South Africa.
Yeah, and it's so geographically close to me. It's almost mind-boggling how these two, it's very, very close. Like we're,
you know the solution, Alex. Here's the solution. Don't think about it. And that's what most people do.
Yeah.
They don't think about it, and then they move on with their life, and it does not exist for them. And once you've kind of been opened up to it and absorbed it in your heart and soul, it's hard not to keep thinking about it. I find.
I agree with you on that 100%, and that's how I feel as well. So, on that note, I think I can let you go because I don't want to use up too much of your time. But I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me, and I'm going to link links to where you can buy your books in the description of this video. And please reach out to me when your next book's ready, and we can talk about that too.
We'll do. No, we'll stay in touch, Alex. I'll talk to you offline, and I'll ship you a copy of the book. And
oh, great!
Like you said, we'll talk further in the future. And once I get this new one out, I think you're going to be excited.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And
all right, thank you, Alex. Take care.
You as well.
Bye-bye.